Okay, so good evening. I think this will be my last video for now. This is, I believe, the 7th video. Anyway, check the number in the title. Losing track. Regarding glaring omissions in the fermentation of the present rebellion. And these omissions, or the claims in the fermentation of the present rebellion that are being addressed in this video are the claim that it was said the manager of the Living Stream Ministry should be fired, and the criticism that the churches had to be for the ministry. Okay. On page 51 of the Fermentation of the Present Rebellion, John Ingalls is charged with suggesting that the manager of the Living Stream Ministry should be fired, as if this was an attack and not a legitimate suggestion. How is it rebellious for an elder in the church in Anaheim to suggest that a manager of the Living Stream Ministry should be fired if that elder is aware of multiple sexual immorality cases and other inappropriate abuse of power going on through this brother? Okay, so I will read Steve Isitt's writing here. The Living Stream manager was responsible for immoral behavior and for division in the churches, which Brother Lee was well aware of before he released the fermentation of the present rebellion. Yet he speaks of John Ingalls suggesting that his son Philip Lee should be fired as being an accusation of John Ingalls. Like, how dare he suggest that the manager should be fired? Paul Kerr, a brother in Anaheim during that turmoil, wrote this: "In the real business world where I operate, Philip Lee would have been fired, legally charged by the abused plaintiff or plaintiffs, forced to settle for millions of dollars, and he and the Living Stream Ministry would have been reported to the California Labor Board." So, how is suggesting that he be fired any factor of rebellion? Secondly, the criticism that the churches had to be for the ministry. On page 51 of Fermentation of the Present Rebellion, John Ingalls was criticized for saying that the churches were now expected to be for the ministry. Quote, "In those days I had further fellowship with Godfred and with some of the brothers we had contacted, with whom we had intimate fellowship through the years concerning the Lord's work. We realized that the spiritual condition of the churches throughout the United States and in other places, generally speaking, was very poor, very low. We searched for the reason. Something was radically wrong." This is John Ingalls in Speaking the Truth in Love. "The Lord's blessing was not among us. Life was at a very low ebb. In a number of places there was considerable discord and dissension, and instead of a steady increase in numbers, there was a steady decrease. We began to realize then that there were practices and tendencies among us that we had never considered before, and we ourselves as well as others were responsible, having participated in these, but we had not seen clearly or realized previously what was being done. Thus we began to come to some conclusions." Quote, "I believe the first was that the ministry was being given a place above the churches and was being too highly exalted and emphasized, so that it became imperative for every church now to manifest that they were for the ministry and to serve the ministry. It was no longer, as we were often told, that the ministry was for the churches and that only the churches should be built up. Rather, the churches now should be for the ministry, and the ministry was being built up. We felt that we should voice such a concern to Brother Lee." So this was based on the ministry. That I also learned that in the full-time training, about the ministry being for the churches and not the other way around. But okay, so then there is just one more section I think I'll read, and that's the change So the accusation in the fermentation of the present rebellion that there was a change after remarkable commendations of Witness Lee. On page 43 of Fermentation, Witness Lee says, Bill Mallon brought John Ingalls out to the countryside and spent a few days with him and eventually convinced him of his dissenting views and thus gained him. Up until that time, according to my knowledge, John had not spoken anything negative or critical about me. Rather, early in 1981, he gave messages in New Zealand in which he compared Brother Nee and myself to the two sons of oil in Zechariah, in which there is a point likening Watchman Nee to Moses and me to Joshua, who brought the people into the good land. John Ingalls' commendation. John Ingalls gave the highest endorsement imaginable of Brother Lee's ministry, which is recorded in 7 pages of the Fermentation of the Present Rebellion, pages 44 to 51. Brother Lee shares, as late as March of 1986, John spoke strongly for the one accord and the ministry in a conference in Mexico City, saying that when you leave the ministry, you leave your first love, and when we leave the ministry, we have fallen. That the ministry brings us the tree of life, and the ministry prepares us in such a way to be faithful unto death, that when we take this ministry, we get the hidden manna, and the ministry is like the morning star to us, that the Lord is coming through the ministry, and the ministry brings us the 7 spirits, and that by keeping the ministry, we become Philadelphia. This message was given only 1 month after I gave the messages on one accord in the elders training in February 1986. Surely it was a strong confirmation of my messages, showing that the speaker was more than positive toward my ministry. Could anyone be more positive toward my ministry than he? Yet only 1.5 years after the giving of this message, he became one of the leaders in the present rebellion and took part in the conspiracy against my ministry. He had a radical change. This is incredible and illogical. I cannot believe that he's being accused of being incredible, illogical, radically changing, taking part in conspiracy against the ministry, and being a leader in a present rebellion, having flip-flopped so quickly when there's no mention of why John Ingalls was concerned. It wasn't a matter of rebelling. It was a matter of not being able to accept the covering up of sin. Okay, so John So's commendation. In May 1986, John spoke strongly and lovingly of Brother Lee, the ministry, and a sweet and practical coordination with the office, pages 21 to 25 of the Fermentation of the Present Rebellion. He went on for 4+ pages this way, exhibiting the highest regard for the recovery and cooperation with the leadership of the apostle and the ministry office. These 2 very high commendations of Brother Lee given by John Ingalls and John So show that their respect for Brother Lee and regard for his ministry was at the top level. Bill Mallon, in his letters to Brother Lee, was also very high in his regard for Brother Lee and his ministry. These brothers were all very happy to be under Brother Lee's ministry. So was I. So are you, probably, if you're still under that, in the way of like the riches. Absolutely. But we have to depart from sin and the covering up of sin and any abuse, including sexual abuse, but also financial abuse, marital abuse, all of that. You can be for the ministry of Brother Lee, but not be for control of believers, and not be for superiority, senses of superiority and exclusivity. And I could go on, but I'm going to keep reading what Brother Steve Isitt wrote. What was truly incredible and illogical was Brother Lee's change and bizarre, costly actions of 1, hiring a sinful, unspiritual son, 2, not firing his sinful son after hearing reports that warranted his dismissal, 3, lifting up his son for others to follow or allowing him to be lifted up, recognized, and followed by others, 4, covering over the sins of his son in the office of the Living Stream Ministry, 5, covering over his son's divisive work elsewhere and that of other Living Stream Ministry co-workers, 6, not acknowledging publicly the corrupting elements his son brought into the recovery, and 7, not repenting for anything, 8, publicly displacing all blame onto others, quote, the brothers who have caused the present turmoil. Why blame those brothers who spoke out when You're aware that what they were speaking out of was credible and was true, and is unscriptural. I mean, completely immoral and corrupting to any godly environment. The contrast is indeed striking between the established love of these three brothers for Brother Lee, his ministry, and the Lord's recovery, and their change in attitude toward him, his ministry, and the recovery. Brother Lee attributed the brothers' change to an attack of the enemy, stating that these brothers became agents of Satan to make division among the churches. And I read something along those lines in my first video of this series from an Elders Training, book number 10. But yeah, saying that just agents of Satan or one with Satan. They seem to be unaware. He seemed to be unaware of his own susceptibility to the wiles of the enemy in reading the testimonies of these three eventually quarantined brothers and realizing their desire for the things of the Lord in the recovery. One has to wonder how they could have experienced such a shift in their position without drastic factors being present to cause the change. Those factors were indeed present and were as incredible and illogical to John Ingalls and John So as their change was to Brother Lee. I'll probably stop there for now, but I have more to read or to share in the future for those to whom this is helpful. If it's not helpful, well, this is the end of the series, so if it's not helpful, you probably aren't watching it to this point. But this is just to provide clarity and to shine light where there is the darkness of lies by the act of omission. Thank you for listening.